Hello, back out again on my own. Son Trav's at college, so I'm pointing to nothing. Yeah, just briefly, I'm doing a bit of a walk from Ditchling Beacon across towards Lewes. Lovely up here, but more importantly, I've got a new series. So what it is the South Downs National Park, which I'm on, and I'll talk about in a minute. It's about 400,000 acres, something like that, from like East Hampshire across to East Sussex. And it turns out, I came across this website called Who Owns the Land? I'll leave a link on the video, but it turns out that out that 400,000 acres, about 100,000 and so on, or give or take, in fact it's over 100,000, is owned by 12 estates. 12 landowners own a quarter of the South Downs National Park, which I found quite interesting. So I've decided I'm doing a bit of research into those landowners. So I'm going to do a series where I go to those estates and talk a bit about those estates, why they're there, that kind of thing. So this video, hang on a minute, cyclist, it's very quiet, there's a few walkers, it's lovely weather. Anyway, I'm rambling. This video is like my intro video, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the backgrounds of South Downs National Park, a little bit about geography of the South Downs National Park, and then maybe a little bit of the history of how these estates came to be and why there's only such a small number of large landowners. I thought there was someone else behind me. It's sort of quiet with the odd person. Anyway, I'll flick you around really quickly. Sorry, changing hands. So heading that way towards Lewes, that way Ditchling Beacon, that way Brighton, that way the Weald, going north like Burgess Hill, Hayward Heath, Plumpton's down there somewhere, a bit further on. Yeah, and it's lovely weather. My muddometer, I'll tell you about sometime, is on 2, which is about right. It's not really muddy, very little mud, and it's quite a good place to be up here, and it's not too windy. And I'm wearing my coat I call the Radiator. All right, I'll catch you in a bit. Okay, a bit further along. Oh God, it's lovely and sunny here. The old Radiator coat, I'm feeling quite warm. I've undone it, taken off the hat, taken off the buff. It is hot, but not baking. I mean, it's actually, the temperature's probably about 6 degrees, but with the sun out, it's lovely. So, second part, I thought I'd tell you a bit more about the South Downs National Park. I've actually made some notes for the first time ever, because otherwise I'll never remember any of it. So what can I tell you? It's England's newest, I think there's 12 in England I'm talking about. It was designated on the 31st of March 2010, became operational, I suppose you call it, 1st of April 2011, operated by the South Downs National Park Authority. It is 628 square miles, runs from Winchester in the west to Eastbourne in the east, so that is also the route of the South Downs Way. So it includes South Downs Park, the Western Weald, which is just over there. I'm on the South Downs Way at the moment. Yeah, includes the whole of the South Downs Way. They first talked about making it into a national park in the 1920s because there was worries about the threats of housing development. Nothing's changed then. And it mentioned Peacehaven was one of the ones that was developed. So there was worries there. It was talked about in the 1920s. It's the last of the original 12 to be designated. Right, 1956 they turned down national park status. The irony was, the reason being, they said there was too much cultivation. It wasn't wild enough. So there you go. But it was made, there was an area of national beauty made to East Hampshire in 1962, Sussex Downs 1966, and then finally, after all the push to have a national park in 1999. I'll just stop in for a sec, have a look around. In 1999, the governments have said they support a national park finally. So there's a public inquiry 2003 to 2005 and a consultation August 2007, an inquiry in 2008, so that's when they then said that it would become a national park in November 2009. And then, oh yeah, it's got, from 2016 it acquired international dark sky status, because it is, even though Brighton's that way, it's a little ways, it's a few miles, quite a walk up here if you can walk up. I parked in the car park. And apparently it's brilliant for dark skies. I have been out a couple of times at night up on the downs and it is spectacular. Probably do it when the weather's a bit nicer, because out here and it's cold, don't know. What else can I tell you? It's, yeah, the South Downs National Park Authority, SDNPA, is there to promote and sort of regulate. It doesn't own, as far as I know, or if it does, it's very little, it doesn't own any of the land. Hence this series about the landowners. The population of the park, i.e. people with houses living on it, farms, 117,000 give or take, so it's the most populous national park. Oh yeah, and finally Downs means medium-sized hills. So that is a little bit about the national park itself. As I say, this video is going to be about the 12 estates that comprise a quarter of it, but I thought I'd give you some background there. And then I will talk a bit more about the geography and the history as to why these estates are here. So, catch you in a bit. Okay, a bit further, lovely views around here. You can't see it, wheeled over there. Brighton. That would be right over there. I walk my last video, Wooding Way. Up there be Firle. Lewes is that way. Oh, I thought I heard someone. Anyway, that's not what the video is about. Just checking my notes. I was going to talk a little bit about the geography, which is probably quite apt as I said where I was. So, to the north, I'll tell you what, I'll turn you around for a second. So yeah, over that way, which is quite a few trees, mainly farmland. But back in the day, that was known as Andredes Weald. Roman times, I think, Andredes came from. So Weald was wood, or woodland. And so it would have been known as the Forest of Andred. And Andredes was the Roman name for Pevensey, which was a huge place back in Roman times. That was Robin Hood country up until medieval times. I think by the time of Henry VIII it was mostly chopped down. It was just thick wood, 120 miles by 30 miles supposedly, so it would have been our equivalent of Nottingham Forest. But over time, you know, going way back, slowly but surely it was cleared. Ironworks, I put deforestation, things like shipbuilding, wood for housing, and they whittled away at it. But back in the day, and even up till medieval times, there's information to say it was thick wood. There was a few roads through, very few people lived there. I read about bandits and things. So yeah, that's the Weald. It was big. And yeah, sadly, it's like, I always think it's like our Amazon forest, but sadly, it is no more. So yeah, turning back the other way, down this way, we're on the Downs, that's the Downs, but this down this way is down to the south, heading towards Brighton way. So these are South Down Hills, ancient routes running across here. There was very few towns, I mean next to nothing up that way for quite a long way. Brighton was a teensy-wincy fishing village. I think at one stage 1700, it had 2,000 people, but before that it was tiny. You had Lewes, which was a major town. So yeah, Neolithic flint mines, you'll find certain places, Sisbury Ring, Harrow Hill, burial sites, Iron Age hill forts. Go to Chanterbury Ring, you can see all these on my videos. Roman temple sites. So this was the main way above the hills where you could command a view, and you only went through there on a few roads. And then right further down, you got down to the coast, so you had small towns, Chichester, Brighton, Pevensey I've written. But it would have been Would it have been treed? I don't know. If you go back way in geology, we're on the chalk downs, and that is to do with basically the chalk is crushed fish, sea creatures over the years, and there's a lot of geology which is, I'm not a geologist, but you can look it up. Maybe one day I'll do a video on how it was all formed and how the hills were formed. But that is the geography of this area, and a lot of the South Downs National Park is wheeled, rolling hills, or the flats. There you go. Right, a bit further on. Oh, it's got sunny now. A little breezy, hence the buff, but lovely and sunny. So, I was going to, for my next topic about this series, I was just going to talk a bit about the history. Like, what's the background to the estates been there? So, if you go way back, we are talking around about up till about 4000 BC. I think there was an ice age that finished about 10,000 BC. Anyway, that's going way back. About 4000 BC, up until then, the people that used to live in this country, around these parts, were what you call hunter-gatherers. So they didn't really settle down. They'd make a camp, hunt, gather, as it's called, hunter-gatherers, and then they'd sort of move on to the next place. And around about 4000 BC, I believe farming was introduced. Did it start in Mesopotamia? That's a complete guess, I haven't checked that. But it filtered through, and people start to realise that if they started planting crops, keeping livestock, they could stay in one place, didn't have to keep moving around. So that's when settlements began. So that's sort of a bit of background. As I say, up on these hills there are a lot of villages dotted around, which again, watch some of my videos, that existed up here. And we know of hill forts. Some of those hill forts, reckon they weren't like permanently occupied. But anyway, that's going off on a tangent. So I'll sort of rush through history. You know, we had, because you don't need to know it all. Well, you might want to know it all, another video. So of course we had the original settlers, we then became the Celts. There's like Beaker people, all sorts of, anyway, so you had the Celts, who again, so the Neolithic was usually between 4000 BC, I don't know, 1600 BC, maybe even later. They were the ones who were doing like flint mining and a lot of burial mounds and things like that. And then the Celts came along and they were building, I think they were Iron Age, I won't go through all that history, that's another video, but they were building like some of these forts and things I've talked about. Then along came the Romans, Caesar in, oh, now I've been testing myself, 100 BC? Anyway, Caesar had a bit of a bash, wasn't that serious, so went home, and then Claudius wanted to make a bit of a name for himself, so he did a proper invasion. Well, he got his general to invade, and then he came along when it was mostly over and took the glory. So then you had the Romans. They built a lot of temples and things, Chancery Ring is an example, and proper brick housing, villas, Bignor we've got round here. Oh, there's one at Chichester I've been to. Anyway, all that kind of stuff, blah, blah. So then after the Romans left, 412, something like that, they pulled out because the empire was falling apart, and that's a, oh God, that would be a whole series in itself. Then the Saxons came, and that was the Angles, Jutes, Frisians. They were basically from North Germany and Scandinavia. Sorry, I'm keeping adjusting so I don't wear my hand out. So they came along. They didn't, it was thought in the past that they sort of invaded and King Arthur defended the country, and that, from what we pick up nowadays, it wasn't really like that at all. It was more, sorry, I'm swapping hands. It was more a case of settlement and taking over that way. Either way, right, okay, so we had the Saxons who were here by about 500, converted to Christianity over the next 150, 200 years. Yeah, I'm skimming a lot of the story, but I'm really trying to get back to why there's these estates here. So the Saxons had divided up, I'm talking specifically about the South Downs and the South and the National Park. The Saxons had divided up the land, you know, local thanes, lords, whatever. Now, we then get all the way around to King Harold, who I'm sure everyone's heard of, and the Norman conquest. So along comes William the Conqueror, whack, Battle of Hastings, 1066 and all that, beats the Saxons. And what he does is, the south is obviously his key place. He landed, I think it was Pevensey, I mentioned it a minute ago. So he wanted to impose the south first because it was a strategic place, obviously, because there were areas like Chichester, that was Roman as well, Lewis. Anyway, so what he did was he divided up the Sussex into strips, which roughly correspond to what the Saxons did, they think. Anyway, these strips were called raps, R-A-P-E-S, however you want to say it. And there was 5 originally and then 6. So he divided it up, and I'll tell you what they were, running from east to west. So you had a Hastings. So the strips, I mean, they were literally town, build a castle at the main town, usually had a river, strip runs straight up through Sussex. Obviously it would include the Weald, but the Weald's a load of trees, and then he puts one of his favourite lords that's come over with him into command to run the land. I think the king retains the land, but he gives it effectively under control to his favourites. So those strips were, yeah, you've got Hastings, then Pevensey. Each of these has a castle. Lewis, then Bramber, Arundel. And then a bit later on, I'm not going to give you the exact dates because it's not all about that, they then split Arundel and put Chichester in as well as a separate one. So there ended up being 6 of these raps, whatever you want to call it. So the lord of the area would run it. He'd have a sheriff, but basically he was the commander. So a lot of the castles, well, someone in the distance, they're just on a bike, so they'll whiz past. A lot of the castles were built as the homes for whoever the lord was. You'd then get sub-castles. Some of them, I'll give you an example, Knepp, I know the castle there, they had lots of hunting parks. So if you come across traditional places, not like places in towns, but traditional places called parks, a lot of them were hunting grounds, like deer and wild boar. So I'm just having a look and letting this cyclist go past. So yeah, that's what happened. All right. Oh, he's gone. So that's how they formed these strips of land and how a lord was put in place. Yeah. So that's where these estates then came from. So as I say, it's generally at a river and then a castle in the south where the towns were that would control the whole area. Usually quite commanding. If you go to Bramber, which is derelict, it's on a high. Arundel's high up. Lewis isn't, but there's a commanding view. Lewis was like a major port area back then. Anyway, so as I say, a lot of the surviving bits of woodland, parks, and sometimes commons, although they tend to be cleared, you'll find the parks were hunting grounds. So that's, thank God for hunting grounds, because that's why we still have a few ancient bits of woodland left, or else that have got chopped down. So the estates were formed. Sometimes they were taken by the lord's retainers. As I said, the few towns there were really small, mostly based around the lord's base, for example, Arundel and Lewis. And then there was some church land. I'll give you examples: Lewis and Boxgrove Priories, which Henry VIII put pay to. We've been to Lewis Priory in another video. That is the gist of how these estates were formed, because the lord that was given it by William the Conqueror basically owned the estate, and then he'd maybe sublet and he let farmers work his estate. It's a whole thing called the feudal system. So that is the history, the geography, a bit about the park. So yeah, we just need to sort of round it off and explain the rest of the series. But for now, I shall push on. Okay, back in the car. After my last segment, I did quite a lot more miles, but I'd said all I needed to, so I didn't see much point showing you me doing that. Anyway, so yeah, sort of a summary. I hope I've given you a little bit of a feel, background, why those estates are there. So what I'm going to do now is there are 12 estates. I'm going to cover the lot. I'm going to do walks on the estates, talk about those estates, talk about the history. As I say, 12% own approximately 25% of the South Downs National Park. So I just thought it was interesting to do a little bit of a tour of each one. I'm going to work from the smallest, like number 12, up to number 1. I can't promise I'll do it in order because I might be doing some other stuff as well. But what I will do is save it as a separate series, and I'll make it clear if it's one of the estate videos. So over the next however long it takes, I'll be walking all the top 12 estates. Yeah, so that's it. I'm not going to score anything today because it's a completely separate type of video. So if I say it was a lovely day, weather was brilliant, I hope you found it entertaining, and I'll see you next time. Bye.